This is Michael Penn with the Real News in Tokyo. Much of the world has been surprised in recent weeks by political bickering between the world's second and third largest economies, China and Japan, over a group of 5 tiny islands where nobody even lives. In spite of the apparent insignificance of the territories involved, they have engendered passions which have spread a crisis throughout East Asia. The intensification of the dispute over what Japan calls the Senkaku Islands and China calls the Diaoyu Islands was triggered by a local government leader, Tokyo Governor Shintaro Ishihara, in April, when he announced that he would use the funds of the Tokyo metropolitan government to purchase 3 of the 5 islands from their private Japanese owner. For his part, Governor Ishihara explained he was only responding to what he saw as threats and provocations from China.
彼らはこの2月にですね、尖閣諸島は私たちにとって致命的な要するに利益の島だと。それで日本の実効支配を要するに破壊するために我々はもっと果敢な行動に出る。そのためのですね、艦船を含めた機材というものをですね、準備すると宣言したんですよ。つまり人のうちにね、強盗に入るということをね、宣言した。この国は過去にもですね、そういう事件を起こしてるんですが、私たちやっぱりね、再三このね、日本の家に踏み込んで物を奪おうとした人間たちがね、もっとはっきり国家のね、要するに意思としてね、人民日報でそれを発表した。その限りやっぱりね、もうちょっとこの島の家の戸締まりをしなくちゃいかんのじゃないでしょうか。
Unlike the majority of Japanese conservatives, Ishihara also chafes at the control that Washington exercises over Tokyo.
I don't like this. これはですね、日本がね、敗戦の後ずっと今日までアメリカの、ね、囲い者、日本語ではおめかけと言いますがね、その立場できた一つ証だと思います。彼らもそう思ってたんでしょう、思ってるんでしょう。
But if Shintaro Ishihara makes it perfectly clear that he doesn't like China and sees it as the heart of the regional problem, voices in the Chinese media make it clear that the antipathy and the sense of threat is mutual. Sino-Japanese relations have nosedived since hawkish Tokyo Governor Shintaro Ishihara unveiled his plan to purchase Diaoyu Islands from their private owner 5 months ago. For Beijing, the highly charged privatization, nationalization political soup Ishihara and the Japanese central government have cooked is eerily reminiscent of the early 1930s, when right-wing extremists hijacked Japan's foreign policy as a restless Japan drifted toward wars, one more treacherous than the other. Japanese nationalists make mirror-image arguments, claiming that history reveals mainland China as the territorial aggressor.
日本国の領土であるのはもう 100% 間違いがないという尖閣諸島に対して常に今チャイナが攻めてきていると。でその攻めてきているそのひどさがどんどん増してきているわけですね。ベトナムとかフィリピンが南沙諸島や西沙諸島を取られたのと全く同じやり方で攻めてきていると。
Discarding Japan's pacifist constitution and the remilitarization of the nation and its culture is seen by Japanese nationalists as necessary steps.
世界の常識だと思うんですけど、その世界の常識を日本人は今まで忘れ去って見ないようにしてきましたが、その当たり前のことをやっていく国家として国民として行動をしていくということを明確に言いたいと思いますし、そういう覚悟を持った日本国に
Some analysts in the American media are beginning to predict that the diplomatic confrontation is likely to lead to military conflict. It is naive to assume the two sides will successfully avoid coming to blows. Sure, both Tokyo and Beijing may currently be playing chicken over the East China Sea and may not have any intention of sparking hostilities. But the way nationalist passions have been stoked in both countries, particularly China, the possibilities of accident or miscalculation are rising. While most analysts do not agree that Japan and China will come to blows in the military sense over this island confrontation, it is widely acknowledged that each country's domestic politics have made it extremely difficult to find a path back to normal diplomatic relations.
The real problem here is both countries, and to a certain extent of Taiwan, have relatively unstable situations domestically. In the case of China, we have a leadership transition going on. And during a leadership transition, there's a period of time where various different actors have a certain amount of leeway to redefine the status quo, to try to push their agendas to be the new policies of the country. In the case of Japan, we have a long-term fight between a right wing which wants a more militarized Japan and the general populace, which is generally not interested in this agenda at all.
Japan and China are major trading partners, and in an objective sense, the diplomatic confrontation over these tiny and uninhabited islands is a lose-lose proposition for both nations, as an article in Japan's Asahi Shimbun recognizes. China's economy could take a severe beating if Japanese companies falter in the escalating standoff over sovereignty of the Senkaku Islands. In a nutshell, China needs Japanese companies to keep unemployment in check and to promote development in rural areas, particularly as its economy is slowing. And yet, independent analysts note that even if the East Asian nations as a whole stand to lose out in this conflict, there are always those who stand to benefit as the overall political situation spirals downward.
You can pretty much identify three different groups as winners. Hardliners in China, hardliners in Japan, and to a certain extent, arms manufacturers in the United States. These three groups are going to profit. They have an incentive to see tensions in between Japan and China.
Nationalist politics is allowing many groups that have previously been marginalized to play a larger role in their country's lives.
There are certain individuals and groups, particularly right-wing, who want there to be tension because it attracts followers to them, it attracts funding to them, and it attracts, at the end of the day, power to them. They will continue to push this agenda, even as the people, and I speak for both the Chinese people and the Japanese people, are not terribly interested in going to war or even having minor skirmishes over these islands.
And from outside the nation too, there are those who find a way to profit.
Through the arms manufacturers have a relatively difficult time. Peace is not good for them. What they're looking for is a way of justifying extremely expensive weapon systems. And the only way they can justify them is through an imaginary high-level conflict between Japan and China. These kinds of incidents between China and Japan help create the atmosphere that make it politically possible for very expensive systems to be sold.
But with the Japanese and Chinese economies linked through hundreds of billions of dollars in trade, whether they like it or not, there is also a strong incentive for the return to business as usual. This is Michael Penn for The Real News in Tokyo.